Allowing for layers. Every area of analysis and every avenue for attention reveals the potential for layers of understanding. Consider the example of mass migration and the layers of explanation that exist to account for the phenomenon. At one level, we have the critique from the perspective of labour, where the purpose of importing large numbers of people is to benefit the capitalist class. Large numbers of new workers suppress wages and increase the numbers of consumers. From this perspective, the modern system is a logical continuation of colonialism. In the old system, colonial lands and their native populations were reconfigured to serve the economic interest of the imperial power. The concept of saving souls provided a moral veneer and allowed subjects of the imperial capital to cheer on the project as though it was divinely ordained. In the current day, the imperium is transnational and the religion is quasi-scientific humanism, but the mechanism is the same. The importation of people benefits the few and is cheered on by the gullible. Above the labour analysis, there is the critique that emphasises globalism. This level points to the various social planners and NGOs that operate to harmonise regulations across different jurisdictions. The importation of large numbers of people facilitates globalist objectives by diluting native opposition and dividing the populace into smaller groups primarily focused on opposing each other. Above the globalist class, there is the power of money creation. At this level, the actors are invisible and their motivations are effectively occulted. The operations of the private banks are hidden, as are the beliefs held by the entities controlling them. We can see that each level of analysis contains truth. The capitalist class is responsible for mass migration, as is the globalist class, as is the occult class. The culprits at each level rely on the other levels. We can recognize that there is an incentive structure that spans the different explanations. The levels of explanation exist because levels of power exist. Observations that are true at the level of interpersonal relationships also apply to groups of people. Machiavellian personality traits are a prerequisite for climbing within hierarchies. In the same way, those groups that exhibit the most Machiavellian traits will outcompete other groups. Hypothetically, let's suppose that there is a group that teaches its members that they are above all others. Let's further suppose that they also teach that for this reason they are hated by the lesser groups. If such a group existed, they would have a competitive advantage. Members would be motivated to compete in ways that non-members would not. Undermining other groups via mafia tactics would be logical and good according to the assumptions of the group. It is a fact of this realm that power is distributed across complicit groups. Anybody can give an explanation for events from a perspective that emphasizes their preferred bad guys and be correct in a limited way. Most people are disinclined to follow the thread and acknowledge that the levels of explanation that can be known continue into levels that are not knowable. Most people do not allow for the explanation that they do not yet comprehend. Making an allowance for the higher explanations must be distinguished from the kinds of conspiracy content that proliferate. Indeed, in the current day, the main function of conspiracy theories is to muddy the waters around major events and create the perception of government omnipotence. The former is achieved by continually introducing new rabbit holes and obscuring the demonstrably true. The latter, by creating the perception that all major events, including fires, earthquakes, and floods, are the result of an all-powerful government. Following the thread of truth through layers of explanation requires placing a premium on personal experience. I am convinced that in my lifetime, the way the world functions has changed. Those who share the conviction choose different dates to delineate the point at which it became apparent that the world was irrevocably altered. For me, the end of 2019 was the line. Before there was any talk of the virus, I began to experience strange physical effects. The sensation was like anxiety, but not precipitated by any identifiable cause. I would be completely fine one moment, and then feel like I was going to faint the next. Sometimes I would wake up at night, gasping for breath, even though my airways were completely clear, and I didn't have any other symptoms. I suspect my blood oxygen level was falling very low at times, though I never sought any medical explanation. By the time the effects became concerning, the medical establishment was enthralled with the nonsense. This strange affliction would go away for a long time, and then return without warning. To this day I occasionally get echoes of it, though the effect is much diminished. It would be 2 years later that I experienced the classic virus symptoms, having acquired it from a friend. The brain fog and change in sensory processing were unlike anything I had experienced previously. As strange as the virus was, it was reflected in unprecedented events in the natural world. During the second half of 2019, the east coast of Australia received almost no rainfall. At the end of the year, the entire eastern seaboard was on fire. What made the fires unusual was that they occurred during long periods of still weather. The smoke descended and stayed for months. It became common to see people wearing masks long before it would be mandated. In 2020, the weather completely changed and we went through 2 years of unprecedented rain. The area where I live is arid, but it became lush in a way that I had never seen. We missed out on 2 summers, with the grass never dying back as it usually does. It became common to have fog in the middle of the day during the summer months. Again, this was something I had never seen before. The weather was only the beginning of the environmental strangeness. During this time, I noticed the clouds making strange formations. The way light looked at the border of clouds had changed, and when the sun was behind the clouds, there was a prism effect, amplifying green and pink. The sky at night was completely different too. This was particularly noticeable before the sun came up and after the sun went down. The false dawn was much lighter than it used to be, and the light after sunset lasted longer. Some nights never got properly dark and the sky remained a greenish grey. On one occasion, I was driving home from work and I saw a rainbow that was only the colours pink and green. Another time, I watched a storm roll in from the south. Ahead of the clouds, there was a point that looked like a flame flickering and alternating between orange and black. I watched this anomaly traverse from one side of the sky to the other. People in my area posted videos of weird lights shooting across the clouds like phosphorescent algae lighting up waves. By far, the strangest effects I noticed were caused by the white sun. I know for a fact that the sun has changed. For 20 years I've been wearing polarized glasses when outside. Occasionally I will look directly at the sun for a moment, just for the hell of it. The sun used to be yellow in the middle of the day, and now it is white. The new white sun is much harsher than the old one. The glare from the white sun spreads across the sky. Often, if a video has the sky in the background, it will appear as a blinding white just from the glare of the white sun. The white light reflects off things in ways that the yellow sun did not. At certain times of day, I've seen the white sun reflected off the leaves of eucalypts on the side of a hill. So much light is reflected that the trees cannot be looked at directly for long. If one looks at the white sun reflected off the water at a certain angle, it will appear blue. If it is seen diluted through tree leaves and reflected off a car, it can appear a light orange. The natural world is responding to the white sun. There are certain bellwether species here that are particularly vulnerable to the harsh light. The north-facing side of a hedge called Photinia, the red gums and some of the white gums suffer badly and shrivel up. Many of the deciduous species that were planted decades ago have stopped growing and died back. Often those planted more recently do not seem able to sustain growth. Of course, these are general observations. Many trees still look reasonably healthy. When one encounters a truly healthy example, though, it becomes apparent that a disproportionate number of some species are suffering in unusual ways. The truly disconcerting thing about the white sun is that one cannot find evidence of the point of change. In old movies and pictures, the sun and sky look much the same. At some point, I realized that a new kind of explanation was required to account for the instability in the natural world. When I first encountered the Mandela effect, I was certain that it was absurd. My preferred way of dismissing the phenomenon was by rationalizing that the real version was being supplanted in the public consciousness by a colloquial version. The more genuine examples I saw, though, the less certain I was of my reasoning. It is unnecessary to list all the instances that I consider to be genuine. There are too many, and each requires an explanation for why it cannot be dismissed. I was most affected by the geography changes, such as the positioning of Australia relative to its neighbouring countries. The way the continent of Australia is tilted with the western side far more northerly than the east. The way Italy is tilted back at nearly 45 degrees when it used to be almost straight up and down. The way the Southern Cross on the Australian flag is lopsided now to match the shifting configuration of the constellation. The way the St. Patrick's Cross on the UK flag is now misaligned on each side of the St. George Cross. The way there is now a faint star above the hammer and sickle on the USSR flag, etc., etc. In every case, there is an explanation within the official fiction for why things are the way they are, but the preponderance of examples compelled me to change my mindset. Rather than operating from the presupposition that fluidity in reality was impossible, I decided to see what the world looked like if such changes were a function of reality. I was aware that the Smithsonian Institute had now always been the Smithsonian Institution, so I looked at other examples of institutes to see if they had changed. I found that the Brookings Institute, which I knew to be a sponsor of the old NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, now had always been the Brookings Institution. Likewise, the Hoover Institute, which I knew from my Red Pill days, had now always been the Hoover Institution. I realized that the popular explanations for the effect were lacking. The most common of these are time travel and glitches in a simulated reality, caused either by human powers or powers beyond that. These explanations do not address the existence of residue, which is where representations of the old world, the old version of things, can still be found. Frequently, the residue will be something created in the form of art. That is, it will be a thing that has required individual creative input. I no longer think in terms of the distinct examples of change. I've come to realize that there is a level of connection beyond the physical, and this substrate that underpins knowable reality is not static. As it shifts, the world we perceive shifts also. From this perspective, the Mandela effect is caused by changes in the invisible mandala of interactions that give rise to form. I suspect that our local branch of reality has become more unstable because we are in unprecedented times. We do not know of another time when so many minds have treated digital representations of reality as real. It is my hunch that this has made local reality unstable in a way that is bringing a correction. I imagine the correction will be similar to the way that sound on a vibrating plate will shift from stable patterns at one resonance before abruptly reconfiguring to a new stable configuration. It looks very much like we are in the transition phase. In a fluid reality, it makes sense that minds are accustomed to moving with the changes. To do otherwise would be to fixate on memories unrelated to immediate survival. Via mechanisms beyond our comprehension, though, the thing is changing. If one is able to accept that this is the case, then the shifts can be glimpsed by paying attention to the features of the natural world. I have a 5-kilo reddish quartz rock that I dug up while hiking on the side of a nearby river. The rock is ovoid and mostly smooth. For years now, I have periodically stared at the rock. I have become acutely familiar with the various features and formations. As crazy as it sounds, the features of the stone are not set in stone. Frequently, slight alterations will occur. Occasionally, the configuration changes in quite significant ways. As I track the shifts, I am aware that I become accustomed to the way it is at each moment, and I cannot see just how different this rock is to the one I originally excavated. The rock, like all physical things, is connected to the underlying linkages. The rock is fluid. Allowing for layers is deciding not to be entirely beholden to any single explanation on offer. The lines in the sky might be the result of an immense spraying program. Maybe so, maybe not. But I know that powerful entities have an incentive to claim that natural changes result from their machinations, and it stands to reason that they generate conspiracies that support that perspective. In a similar way, I know that the climate is different. The material anthropogenic explanation is probably mostly nonsense, and as is the reflexive denial of the changes. I have seen the strange variability in nature. This instability is related to the increased variability in human behavior. Everything that happens can be explained within the bounds of a given worldview to the satisfaction of those who hold that worldview. Materialists can account for all things by excluding forms of empiricism that are not scientific empiricism. In every age, people have explained the world by reference to the technology available at that time. Inevitably, they are always wrong. Our age is not different. Deception is limited by presuppositions, and it is hubris to flatly deny that levels of organization exist beyond our capacity to comprehend them. There is an orientation to life that follows a thread through the knowable and still allows for the unknown.